Yes, as Singer Man has said, every weekday evening this week we're going to be exploring one of 5 archetypal Buddhas who form a sort of set, for want of a better word. A mandala is a more Buddhist word, of 5 Buddhas. And yeah, last night we had the Buddha of light, and tonight we've got the Buddha of beauty and abundance, Ratnasambhava, which means, Ratnasambhava means born of the jewel. And yes, well, those of you who are regular to the centre will see that sort of in front, behind this, you probably can see we've got our usual Buddha figure, and our usual Buddha figure, you can catch a glimpse, is in a way is depicting you could say, the historical Buddha, the Buddha of history, the character who was born a human being and through his own efforts realised this state that we call enlightenment. Very, very important to Buddhists that the Buddha was born a human being. The Buddha wasn't a god or anything like that. The Buddha was born a human being. And yeah, through practice and meditation and practicing ethics and all different practices, you realise this state called enlightenment. And when he realised enlightenment, it was a very, very decisive moment. It's not an end point. Enlightenment isn't an end point. It's not like a full stop. The enlightenment, you could say, is the furthest point on the horizon that we can see, or we probably can't even see it. We can even imagine. Even after enlightenment, there's still continual creativity and unfolding. So it's not an end point, but it's a decisive point. Because at that point, a human being has become something more than human, if you like. At enlightenment, the Buddha was the first human being to break free of the sort of the circling round in self-reference, to completely break free of that. So the sort of state of being of a Buddha, an enlightened being, would be completely free of any such notions as what's in it for me, any such notions as what am I going to get out of such and such a situation, completely free of the sort of why is this happening to me? When we have a difficult experience, very, very common to feel like, why is this happening to me? And also, what do people think of me? How am I coming across? That we're entrapped by. We're entrapped by those 3 things, circling around to what's in this for me, what am I going to get out of it, what do people think of me, and why is this happening to me? A Buddha has completely broken free of that. An enlightened being has completely broken free of all those notions. It's like they're irrelevant. They don't mean anything anymore. They kind of don't make sense. It's a bit like, I don't know what it's a bit like. It's a bit like the sort of, it's a bit like, is it like this? Maybe a bit like the kind of, the worries that a little child or a teenager might have, and while we can sympathise with them, we can sort of see through them as adults, hopefully anyway. We can. Sometimes we still get caught in them, don't we? We're still sympathetic to them, but we know, like, it's all right, we can look at that little child and think, oh, it's all right, you don't actually have to cry about this, it'll be all right. So perhaps it's a bit like that. Those kind of those things that concern us and that we worry about are no longer relevant to an enlightened being. There's no selfish perspective left at all. There's none of this kind of circling back to me left at all. And when that happens, and what the Buddha's taught us is that is a possibility for any and all of us. So when that happens, if that happens, but when it happens, you could say that all that's left is something like this. All that's left is what the artist has tried to depict in this sort of vision of light, And you could say that all that's left is love. All that's left is a sort of jewel-like love and light. That's all that's left. And it's blissful, it's free, and it's radiant. So that's what these archetypal Buddhas that we're talking about this week are sort of trying to show us that when we break free of this self-reference, it's not that there's nothing left. It's not nihilism. When we break through this sort of prison of selfhood in a particular way, we don't disappear. It's like we reappear as something completely amazing, as beings of light, and the experience would be blissful, and it would be of connection, of love. It'd be it's funny, that word love, isn't it? I was just thinking about that as I was sitting here waiting to speak to you. I was thinking perhaps it's something more like empathy. Empathy maybe doesn't sound strong enough, but a sort of it'd be complete resonance with other beings. It'd be that kind of love. It wouldn't be a sort of soppy love or kind of exclusive love for one person rather than another. It would be an empathy. And I imagine that we've all had little glimpses of that. I imagine we've all had little glimpses, or even medium-sized glimpses, of that sort of positive self-forgetting. A sort of positive self-forgetting. It also often accompanies sort of aesthetic experience when we're just like gazing at something very, very beautiful, perhaps very, very beautiful in nature, perhaps very, very beautiful in art, perhaps very, very beautiful in the actions of another person. When we're just captivated by that beauty, there's a sort of positive self-forgetting. For a moment, we're sort of free of that sort of what's in it for me type of thing. Nod if you kind of know that sort of experience, yeah? Oh, good. Okay, good. I'm good that you know what I'm talking about, but even better that you've had that experience. It's a human experience. So these, the mandala of the 5 Buddhas that we're talking about this week, and the archetypal Buddhas, they're like crystallizations of that bliss, that freedom, and particularly that love. So an artist then try and paint that. Of course, you can never paint it. You could, artists might try and paint it, like poets might try and poeticize it. You can never actually paint it. But trying to do it's important. I was very, very pleased. It was the first time I saw this image when I walked into the Shrine Room today. We borrowed these from the Bristol Buddhist Centre. I was very, very pleased to see this image because I kind of thought, oh yeah, that's when I'm meditating on this figure of Ratnasambhava. It's a bit like that. There's a lot of light. And the jewel, you can see that the figure's holding, it's got a jewel right at the centre. Is very, very bright, which is, in my imagination, that's how Ratnasambhava appears. The jewel that he holds is called the Chintamani, the wish-fulfilling jewel. The jewel is like crystallised nectar. It's like a drop of nectar crystallised. And the whole figure is like the crystallisation of love. So you've got this crystallization at the heart in the form of the jewel, but the whole figure is actually a crystallization of that sort of empathetic love. So all of these archetypal Buddhas, when we imagine them, they're often imagined appearing in the blue sky. The blue sky itself is a symbol for openness, mystery, possibility. It's actually a very, very good metaphor, actually, blue sky, because it is quite mysterious, the sky, isn't it? It's like we're all familiar with it, the blue sky. We're all attracted to it. but what exactly is it? It kind of feels like it's up there, but straight, if you go up there, like if you go up there in an aeroplane, say, it's not like the aeroplane, it's not like it's blue inside the aeroplane, do you know what I mean? It's somehow this, where is it, the sky? We sort of know it's there and we know it's blueness, but where is that blueness and what? I mean, I actually do know because I did study physics, and some of you right? Suddenly realise I do know what the blueness is, but anyway, forget the physics just now and leave the mystery of like where is the blueness. It's a bit like children draw the sky like a sort of stripe, don't they? You know how children do, there's like a stripe in the sky and then there's this other green stripe for the grass, but it's not really like that. It's not like a stripe in the sky. It's something that we can see and experience, but where really is it? We can't actually get up to the blueness. So I think it's quite a good metaphor for that mysterious, open dimension of being, and it's beautiful. And it appears differently at different times. That literally happens, doesn't it? Like the sky, if we were to go out just now, it's a night sky. We'd still be able to look into it and we'd see darkness, we'd see a sort of dark night sky. You have the dawn sky, and you have the evening sky, often lit up by the sun's rays. Again, very, very attractive, isn't it? Everybody's just naturally attracted to a setting sun and that sort of evening sky. Ratnasambhava, this Buddha of beauty, appears in the noonday sky. The summer, the height of summer, the noonday sky. So it's that very bright blue noon sky, and he's a solar symbol. So he's like the sun. He's the colour of the sun, Ratnasambhava, and to me that's very, very attractive. Just this summer bright sun, and one of my favourite descriptions of metta, meaning loving kindness. Did people learn about that tonight? Oh, good. So even if you're new to the centre, you'll have heard this word metta, loving kindness, which we translate as loving kindness. One of my favourite descriptions of that is it has the effect on beings, effect on the sort of the spirit, the spiritual nature of beings, as the actual sun has on flowers and plants. I love that, actually, just this notion of just as the sun, everything grows towards the sun, doesn't it? Very, very quickly, actually. Flowers, if you put on the windowsill, they turn to the sun, they open in the sun, they thrive in the sun. So metta's like that. So the metta of a Buddha, this completely unselfish love of a Buddha, would be like the sun. If we were in a sense, I was going to say, if we were in the presence of that, in a certain sense, we are in the presence of that all the time. In a certain sense, if you don't take that literally, if you take it imaginatively, and we can just allow ourselves to sort of turn towards it and open and flower. So you've got this Buddha of the noonday sun in this bright summer sky, and Ratnasambhava as well as being the Buddha of beauty, is the Buddha of generosity. You can't, in the picture, I actually like the picture that it's kind of quite sort of hazy, but what it means is you can't quite see the hand gesture, so I'll just describe it to you. Can you see that one hand's got the jewel, but the other hand you can see that it's stretching down. It's turned outwards, and this is in the mudra, or hand gesture, of generosity. So it's turned outwards, it's the mudra of giving. So Ratnasambhava is the Buddha of generosity. I've kind of come to, over the years, think that it's better to talk about him, if I'm allowed to change the definition slightly, as the Buddha of abundance. I think the reason is why even when you use the word generosity, well, it is a very beautiful word, but it's still got a sense of like me giving something to you or you giving something to me. Whereas when you get to the stage of a Buddha, in a way that even that notion becomes redundant. The notion of there's a separate me giving a thing to a separate you is far too kind of crude a way of looking at things, because by the time of Buddha, it's like my desires as important as yours, or I should say yours as important as mine. There wouldn't be that distinction. There wouldn't be that distinction between sort of giver and gift and recipient. There would just be this sense of abundance and responsiveness and appropriateness to the situation. And I think that's, I think the mudra, I think you get a sense of that if you take the whole mudra together. So you've got one hand giving, and you've got the other hand holding a jewel. You could say, okay, the jewel is the abundance, and from that abundance is the wish-fulfilling jewel, so it's limitless. It's like an unending store, it's never going to run out. You could say that from that limitless store of the jewel, giving is possible. But I think even that makes it too separate. I think I've come to think that both the hands are the same gesture, if you see what I mean. That both the abundance and the giving is the same thing, I don't know if I've put that very well, really. Like what I'm trying to say is, from our point of view, the two hands look like a different thing. We're used to thinking, okay, I need to have something in order to give it away. But from the point of view of the Buddha, there wouldn't be that distinction anymore. There'd just be this complete flow of abundance, the very giving would sort of feed back into the richness. Yeah, does that kind of just sort of this is and again I'm sure. Well, maybe I can take that back to our experience. I'm sure that we have had certainly more. We've certainly had probably quite a few experiences of that. It's a bit like, that experience of someone you really love asks you to do something, and you just do it, don't you? You're actually glad to do it, and they might say thank you to you, but even though they're saying thank you, and I'm sure one is politely receiving that, the internal feeling is there's nothing to say thanks for, yeah? It just felt like, to you, it felt like the most completely natural thing in the world to do that. To them, it feels like you've been generous, but to you, it doesn't feel like that. Do people know that experience? Yeah, so good. That's very kind of, that's part of our human experience. So, but can you imagine feeling like that all the time to every being? And if you can, then that would be like Ratnasambhava's generosity. That would be what I mean by this one hand holding the jewel, on the other hand in the gesture of giving, is actually one and the same thing. So if you can sort of extrapolate from that a Buddha would feel like that all the time to all beings. Yeah, they would just want to respond, and it wouldn't take anything away from. There would be no impoverishment. There would just be actually more richness. So that's why I've come to think that I'm thinking of Ratnasambhava as the Buddha of abundance, even more than the Buddha of generosity, gets more the flavour of who Ratnasambhava is. He's the Buddha of beauty. He's the Buddha of beauty. So I thought this was amazing when I first encountered this. This notion that, a beauty as a path, as beauty as a spiritual path. I had been brought up. I was going to say I'd been brought up as a Catholic. I embraced Catholicism with a vengeance, actually, when I was a little girl. I was born a Catholic, and I took to this very strongly, with great piety as a child, and I was constantly going to mass all the time, and the priest even had to do extra confession, especially for me. And because the poor priest, actually, I remember sitting there on a Saturday morning, and now I look back and imagine him with a bit of a sigh, thinking, oh, it's her again, ready to say my confessions. I loved going to confession. I loved books of reading stories of martyrs, and I was determined to be one when I grew up. And some of my friends may think there still may be traces of this, but I was determined to be a martyr. From the teachings I was receiving from Catholicism. And from my own inclination, I very much thought of spiritual life as one of suffering, and that suffering was what? The way forward, I guess. So suffering was the way forward. That the best thing one could do would be to be a martyr, and suffer. The more one suffered, the more one would be somehow being a good person, the Catholic teachings kind of helped this along, I remember, praying, and I remember as a little girl, very fervently, instead of playing at playtime, really praying for all the souls I'd been told were in purgatory, which is a sort of nearly hell, but not quite, for people that haven't been brought up like that. But anyway, your prayers could save these beings, and so that was what I did instead of playing. So can you imagine when I encountered Buddhism, I gave up this Catholicism and encountered Buddhism, and I went on one of my very first retreats many years ago now, about 30 years ago now, and discovered that there was this Buddha of beauty, and that actually beauty was a path, that actually by opening oneself to beauty was kind of valid, was not just valid, but actually was encouraged. It was a revelation to me. I was filled with delight, and really from that moment, became a devotee really of this figure of Ratnasambhava. Started to learn more about the symbolism. Started to imagine the figure in meditation, and so on. And then when I became ordained, which was about 20 years ago, formally took up a practice of meditating on this figure every day. But even before that, I had been very strongly bringing this figure, this archetypal figure, his symbolism and so on to mind, even before I was ordained. Yeah, really from that first moment of hearing about this figure. And it's interesting, this notion of devotion. I don't know what you make of that. Some people like it, and some people aren't too sure about this notion of devoting oneself to a figure. I must say, I was very, very pleased to realise that there was a figure, an archetypal figure that could, if you like, bear the weight of one's devotion. I tried it with people, I suppose boyfriends really. It didn't really work, because of course they, and it wasn't, in a sense now I can see it wasn't really fair, it wasn't really fair to put one's whole sort of devotion on a person, because how could they bear the weight of that, as it were. So like people it wasn't going to work with. God it didn't work with, because the Christian God, who's, well, in my understanding, who was meant to be the God of love, couldn't bear the weight of that devotion, because he let you down because, well, kind of bad things happen to good people, the prayers didn't work, so God couldn't bear the weight of the devotion. And when I discovered Buddhism and discovered the Buddha, well, as more than historical figure, the Buddha as the representation, if you like, that's the best word I can think of a limitless ideal, I thought, well, that can bear the weight of my devotion. A limitless ideal, one can be as devoted forever. It can never run out. It can never smack up against, that's enough devotion, or that's. Do you see what I mean? It can, because the ideal is limitless, one's devotion can be limitless because it can never. There's no end to it because it's like the blue sky, actually, isn't it? You can never, no matter how high you go, there'll still be more blue sky above you. So a limitless ideal could allow me to be completely devoted, sort of safely in a way. I could abandon myself to that devotion. I didn't think I was going to say all that, but it's been very, very important to me. Actually, any archetypal Buddha figure will allow that. The particular one that resonated with me was this figure of Ratnasambhava. But yes, any archetypal figure of the Buddha will do it, because what the archetypal figures are is they're like crystallizations of this principle of enlightenment itself, and enlightenment itself is a limitless ideal. So you can devote yourself as much as you like, sort of safely. There won't be a sort of end to it. There'll be no comeuppance to doing that. Okay, so I want to maybe this follows, or maybe this is a question in your mind. It certainly was in mine, and perhaps to some extent still is, although not quite in the same way, as sort of who really are these figures? Like I'm talking about them as archetypal figures. I'm talking about myself as being, devoted to one of these archetypal figures. But who are they, and where are they, if you like? Where are they? I think this is kind of an important sort of question to ponder. Is it? In a way, I imagine you will be asking, where are these figures? If you're not, you should be actually. Where are they? Where are these figures? Do they exist or do they not? But the answer to that question of do they exist or do they not, we can only answer by asking another question, which is, what does existence actually mean? Those of you who were here last night will remember that Singaman has already started to address this question. I don't mean started to because of any limitations in Singaman. I just thought it's an unanswerable. We can only start to ask it. What does existence itself mean? What does it mean? And I can only. I'll try and just talk about it with a few tiny experiences of my own. I can only really talk in examples. I can't really talk in metaphysics. I'm going to start by talking about a rainbow. It was a particular rainbow that I saw. It was the most amazing rainbow I've ever seen in my life, and that probably I ever will see. I was on solitary retreat last year for 2 whole months in the Spanish mountains. It was in the Pyrenees. It was the weather is very dramatic if you've ever been there. So there was loads of storms and stuff like that happening fairly regularly. And I was in a little cabin, and one night there was this really, even quite scary storm. I'm not given to be scared of lightning and so on, but this time I was thinking, lightning is actually quite close. It was evening, the sky was very dark, sort of dusky. And in my little cabin, I thought, we'd better turn the lights out. So I turned the lights out just in case we were struck by lightning. And I was watching this storm. And then the lightning sort of seemed to die away. And there was this sort of amazing light in the sky. And yeah, as I say, it was kind of dusk. The sun had sort of set behind the mountains. You couldn't see the setting sun, but there was still light in the sky that wasn't just the lightning. It was amazing kind of, bright darkness, that sort of sky. And anyway, it felt safe enough. The lightning had stopped, so it felt safe enough to go outside. So I stepped outside, and as soon as I stepped outside, I burst out laughing, because there in the sky was like, when you see like children's like picture books, and there's a rainbow, but it's like just like painted in stripes, like with the colours like in these sort of stripes. But that was there in the sky. It was like a child's sort of drawing of a rainbow. It wasn't like our usual rainbows that are a bit sort of ethereal. It was like these sort of stripes in the sky, really, really big. Each stripe was really big and really distinct. And, the colours were all really, bold. Like, that's what, really what, the closest thing was like the child's drawing. Or the only other thing I could think of was, like those ice lollies you get, I don't know what they're called, a Zoom or something like that, and it's got different colours of ice. It was a bit more like, because it was kind of crystalline, a bit like an ice lolly, but it was in the sky. Anyway, I burst out laughing to see it. And of course, like, stood and watched it for ages. And I thought, at that moment, I know what people mean now when they say they see visions as real as, I don't know, these flowers or something, because this thing was in the sky, but what was it? What is a rainbow? It's actually not anything, it's just light. Well, it's refracted light, isn't it? But it's not a thing. It's not actually a thing. And eventually, of course, it faded away. And when it fades away, it doesn't go away. Like, where does it go? Because it wasn't even really there in the first place, as in there. Do you see what I mean? It was simply light, but yet it was as bright and clear as, a nice lolly, as a flower. So I think that started to get me possibly a tiny step closer to that question of what does it mean for something to exist? Why do I think that was any more or less real than these flowers or you or anything? What does looking at something actually mean? And then I came home from that retreat, and I hadn't. Usually when I go on retreat, I read some poems, but I don't tend to read novels on retreat, just for simplicity. And I came home, and I started reading this novel. It was by I can't even remember who it was by. It was by a new author. Not a famous author. It was a good novel. I can't remember what it was called or who it was by, but I can remember thinking, like, this is amazing. I just thought this novel, and I was going round to everybody saying, you've got to read this novel. Like, the characters were so real. There was this main character whose life I was following, who died in the end. That's not a spoiler, since I can't even remember what the novel was. And I remember talking to Singer Manasai, so I don't know if you remember, and I was going, gosh, Singer Manasai, do you think I can put this character from the novel in the Metabhavna? Because I felt like, and he was saying, oh yeah, why not? And I thought that was quite the right answer. I thought, why not? Why? Do you see what I mean? Like, why? I don't know if I'm going to be able to put this into words. We can. Why does it matter whether it's a character in a novel or a so-called real character? Our usual mind makes this distinction. My slightly kind of sensitised mind, with being on like 5 months of retreat, that distinction was less real than it normally is. So actually, a character from a novel was just as valid a sort of a subject, I can't say person, a subject for meta to arise as a so-called real person. There was less distinction than usual. So why I'm saying all this is that I think it's worth in meditation, but actually in life, is to start to realise that the distinctions that we make between really existing and not really existing is less hard and fast than we usually think it is. I think if we're going to have any sort of dharmic life, any sort of spiritual life, any really actually sort of human life, to be honest, that question is really important. Not as a question to actually sit down and kind of pontificate about or argue about when you've, had a few, whatever you might have had a few of, when you have those kind of discussions, but actually as more a meditative experience to start to play with those notions, because I think then our mind opens up, and I think then we can properly engage our imaginations with a figure such as Ratnasambhava, and allow a figure such as Ratnasambhava to affect us. Or maybe this is my real point, that when I'm talking about being devoted to this figure, which I am, it actually isn't just a matter of devotion. It might have that. It's got that aspect to it. But that would be relatively meaningless in terms of my own experience if I wasn't also allowing that figure, for want of a better word, to have an effect on me. If I'm not allowing that figure to have an effect on me, it's not really, it wouldn't really come to much. Devotion itself isn't going to come to much. What really comes to much is if we're allowing oneself to be affected, just like the character in the novel was affecting me. And actually great figures from literature do affect us, don't they? We can almost feel like they become like Lady Macbeth or something. They have an actual life of their own. So, and we can only apprehend those figures with our imagination. And that is only our imagination will only come to life if we can start to deeply ponder that question of what do we mean when we talk about really existing or not really existing. If we allow that to open up, then we'll allow ourselves to be affected by a realm of experience that can only be apprehended by our imaginative faculty. Oh goodness, that's exhausting trying to put it into words. Okay. If we do that, then we will, I can tell you, we will be affected. Very, very hard over a period of, very, very hard to know actually what affects us and what doesn't when we're doing a multitude of things. But I would say that in terms of my own Dharma practice, my contemplations of this archetypal figure of Ratnasambhava and my conscious trying to allow myself to be affected has had an effect. I can't really prove it to you. I can't even actually prove it to myself. I think it must be true though, because I think no matter how much sort of meditation I'd done under my own devices, I think I probably, I think if I had only been left to my own devices, the effects would have been relatively small. There would have been some effect, but I'm not really that good a meditator. I'm not really that, I haven't got like fantastic abilities to be concentrated and so on. I don't think, if it was just down to sort of me, I don't think there would have been that much hope for me in a certain sense. I think I've been able to call on something that goes far beyond me, as I think of myself, has probably, certainly had a bigger effect than I even realise. And that effect's been both, on the whole, subtle, but every now and then it's been a little bit dramatic. So I thought I might share with you just maybe a time when I felt it more definitely, if you'd like to. Would you like to hear a time when it's felt more definite? Yeah, okay. And a little bit magical, even a little bit miraculous. And I'm only... maybe I sort of caveat that to say I'm only sharing this. Should I share it? It almost feels like a slightly... well, I hope I'm doing the right thing with sharing it, and I hope you take it in the right spirit. I'm sure you will. I shouldn't say that, should I? I'm sure you will take it in the right spirit. It was... so here's a definite experience. It happened a good number of years ago. It happened when I was living at the Dublin Buddhist Centre. I had, shortly after I was ordained in my early 30s, and shortly after that, a year or 2 or 3 after that, I went to our Dublin Centre to help there. Dublin Centre is much smaller than the centre here. They needed order members to go and help to flourish the centre. So I said I would go and do that. And I went, and I was working at the centre, and I was also working in a Buddhist gift shop. And working in the Buddhist gift shop was part of my Buddhist practice, and we were working in a team, but also that was my means of support, my means of financial support to enable me to then work and teach at the Dublin Buddhist Centre. So for a while that was all fine, but then the shop closed down. The landlords put the rent up, the Celtic Tiger, as it was at the time, collapsed, and the gift shop closed down. And so I had no means of financial support anymore. The centre certainly didn't have enough money to do that. And so I thought, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to stay here and work for the centre? If I go and get a job, I'll have the money, but I won't have any time to do all the teaching at the centre. If I do all the teaching at the centre, I won't have any money, and I do need some to pay the rent and so on. So I thought, I wonder if I should pray to the Buddha for some money. And so usually, I wouldn't petition the Buddha in such a way. It seems in the sort of slightly bad taste to think of like praying to the Buddha for money. That wouldn't be a normal thing I would do. But because on this occasion I was thinking, well, it's not really for me, it's so that I can keep teaching meditation on the Dharma. Perhaps that's different, but I still wasn't quite sure. So I asked a close friend of mine, Pavra, another order member who I trust. I said, Pavra, what do you think? Do you think I could pray to the Buddha for money so that I can stay here teaching the Dharma? He said, totally, you can. He said it's for the Dharma, so you can do it. So I thought, okay, I'll do it then. So what I thought was I'll do it for 3 days. I'll do it for 3 days in a row. I'll pray to Ratnasambhava for the means of support. And so the first day I prayed to Ratnasambhava. The second day I prayed to Ratnasambhava, and then on the night of the second day I had a dream. And in the dream, I dreamt of an order member, It's actually the order member who made the Buddha figure who's behind this picture. His name is Chintamani. Now you might remember from the beginning of my talk that the jewel that Ratnasambhava holds is called Chintamani. Yeah? That is the Chintamani. So in this dream, the order member who's named after that jewel, called Chintamani, appeared to me. And he gave me an envelope, and when I opened this envelope, it was full of jewels. It was full of like little tiny jewels, and they're all sparkling in the dream. And in the envelope also was a letter, and the letter was from some people, and the people said, "Oh, thank you for teaching us the Dharma. Here's a gift for you." And the names were signed, and I felt really embarrassed because I thought, oh, like they've signed their names, but I don't know who they are. And yeah, here's some people, and they're saying I've taught them the Dharma, but I don't know who they are, and they've given me all these jewels. Anyway, then I woke up, and as soon as I woke up, I knew that the dream was the answer to the prayer. And I knew that the meaning of the dream was to just trust the people who've learned the Dharma, even if you don't know who they are. Yeah, I knew that just intuitively. You know how sometimes you just know the meaning of dreams. So I knew that, and I knew that so strongly that was the answer to the prayer, that I knew that that it would be sort of wrong to pray on the third day because the prayer was already answered by the dream. So I didn't pray anymore. I just, I don't know what I did. I guess I just waited to see what would happen, but I seemed to strongly know that the prayer was answered. And a few weeks later, I came over for a visit to the UK, and a friend of mine who also worked on one of these Buddhist gift shops, which hadn't closed down, said, "Oh, can you come to tea in our shop? We'd really like to see you." And I said, "Okay, that would be nice." And I went up to tea, and I went to the staff room, and then there was these 5 or 6 women there standing, and they were really, really, really smiling. And they were really, really smiling, looking really excited. And one of them stepped forward and gave me an envelope. And in the envelope was a substantial cheque of money. And they said, we had some profits and we wanted to give them to you so that you can stay and do your work in Dublin. And there it was. So that was, well, that's it really. But anyway, it's amazing really, isn't it? So that was, that I felt that was Ratnasambhava. And I felt they were Ratnasambhava. And actually, I felt those women, I mean, I can still see their smiles when I think of them. And I felt they were, that thing I was talking about earlier about the, the gesture of giving and the jewel. I felt like, I can't tell you how happy they looked. They were so happy, I mean, obviously I was delighted, but then I would say they were possibly even happier than me in a certain sense, when I remember how happy they were to give me this and to know what, what their work, I mean, they'd worked for this money in the shop and they gave it to me. And, they hadn't known about the dream or anything, but I definitely felt that was Ratnasambhava in action. So I'm sort of telling you this to show that it's not just our imagination, I can't really make you any promise, other than, I can't promise that one's prayers will be answered. But I can promise that if you meditate on the Buddha and consciously allow that to affect you, that will change you, and maybe even every now and then, once or twice in your lifetime, something of that nature may happen. But the thing is, you can't expect, you can't guarantee, you can't expect, it only happens when you're not expecting it, if you see what I mean. That's the thing. And, I'm supposed to finish at 9:30, haven't I? I forgot, I thought it was 9:45. So I better finish. On that. We didn't have time to chant the mantra. Oh well, I'm sorry about that. We don't have time to chant the mantra. But you did have time to look at the figure as I've been talking. And very, very, it gives me delight to introduce you to Ratnasambhava, one of the 5 Buddhas, the Buddha of beauty, the Buddha of abundance, the Buddha who holds the jewel, the wish-fulfilling jewel, which fulfills all skillful wishes. His name is Ratnasambhava, who's the Buddha of the south, the noonday sun, the blue summer sky. And to invite you to come back, to come tomorrow morning if you can for our morning meditation, to our lunchtime class, but particularly to come back tomorrow evening and hear about the next Buddha in our series, the Blue Buddha of wisdom, who's got a whole different set of qualities. So that's all from me for tonight. So thank you very much, and I'll see you.